Rock and roll has affected American society in millions of ways, and will keep affecting society as the music evolves. Each individual will have their own opinion on the matter because the music affects us in each of our own way. But this is our interpretation to the pondering question how rock and roll affects society.
The influential music of rock and roll originated in New Orleans and spread towards the Western Hemisphere. This new type of music was a mix of blues and country twang.
It dominated popular music in the late 1940s and played the records of small independents like King and Atlantic.
And people started writing in from El Paso to Richmond and from Detroit to New Orleans and from the Bahamas and all over.
All right, friends, look out. Let's go down New Orleans way. Mr. Antoine Fats Domino.
I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill.
New Orleans gave birth to many of the first rhythm and blues records that crossed over to a large white audience.
It first started with Fats Domino, whose music broke the lines of segregation despite society's controversial views. His music influenced producers to promote black music, opening the door to a world without segregation.
Fats Domino offered white kids an easy first step into the world of black music.
Another musician that influenced integration was Little Richard. His upbeat, spontaneous personality attracted all youth audiences, and his unique portrayal of rock and roll music was something new that greatly influenced the new generation.
I'm Little Richard, baby. I'm the innovator, I'm the emancipator, I'm the originator, I'm the architect of rock and roll. Don't you ever forget it. This is me. Nobody but me. Ain't nothing like me nowhere.
White people would sit upstairs. The black people would be downstairs because I was a black band. And the white people would leap over the balcony and come down where we were, and the audience would start integrating with Tutti Frutti.
Young and a teenager, I wanted to sound different. Me and the young kids, we was tired of all that slow music. We wanted the boogie. You know, same as when rap music came in today, the kids got tired of what's going on. They wanted something different. They wanted something from their generation.
Buddy Holly came next, being the pioneer of rock and roll. His contemporary ways influenced the youth in his band. The Crickets set up the structure of the classic band. 2 people on guitar, a drummer, a singer, etc.
The young white musicians started to come in, took on a different tone using a music that was already existing. So when people said rock and roll started, rock and roll had already been there.
The infamous Elvis Presley followed, being widely known as the King of Rock. His fusion of country and rhythm blues attracted the new generations of the United States, and with his contemporary style of rock and roll. Elvis really popularized rock and roll as a huge influence to culture and the relationships between blacks and whites. He strongly respected African American artists and disregarded the norms of segregation.
The 1960s was an influential year of reform and rebellion. This new generation started the counter-revolution, and the Vietnam War influenced musicians to take a stand and protest with anti-war music. It was a form of communication that served as a uniting factor for a population that felt disenfranchised. The music inspired people to take a stand and protest like the Ban the Bond movement.
It's had a huge cultural impact, on kids and adults, and it's there's a certain freedom to it, and it just means a lot. Those two words, when you put them together, it actually says something to you.
The 1960s is known as the cultural decade because of its tragic events. The assassinations of JFK, Bobby Kennedy, and Martin Luther King showed the United States the corruption in society. This corruption is displayed in lyrics as musicians seem to be crying out for change and rebellion. Musicians' concerts involved anti-war protests like Woodstock. These events led to millions of youth to use an abundant amount of drugs and destructive protesting.
Until we can convince people or convert peace into something economic, well, we'll pay for it. It's like with our films. We've made about 8 films. We can only show them to students at the moment and on a very limited thing. So we've used our own money to make the films rather than wait for people to catch on. It's like as a Beatle, if we'd have had money to afford recording before, because we went around every studio trying to get in. And if we'd have been able to afford to make the record first and then show them, what we would have done is, so that's what we're doing with Peace, is like making the record and then taking it around trying to sell it to pay for the tapes later.
Beatles were a great influence in this traumatizing decade. Their song Revolution talks about how protesters were becoming just as radical as the government. The lyrics question the hypocritical extreme protesters who were trying to end the war with destruction. Another influential musician was Jimi Hendrix. His song, Hey Joe, showed the brutalities of the Vietnam War. He supported many anti-war movements. He even stated on December 31st in 1969 at Woodstock, "This song is for all the soldiers fighting in the Vietnam. May not be many more of them." All right. Many other musicians aroused the youth to change society. The Vietnam War revealed the corruption in the government and society, which influenced music to advise the youth to rebel, hoping for a better future.
This great music that we've discovered, this great music which is still growing, this music which now you can write songs about what's really happening deep inside of you and what's happening around you in the world, can also sound extraordinary.
The U.S. was recovering from the previous historical events such as the brutalities of the Vietnam War and the economical crisis that came with it. The media, music in particular, influenced the youth and culture as a whole in the way the United States had not seen before. Rock and roll adapted and changed to convey the issues of the time period and the ideas that were most significant in society. The music inspired the new generations to rebel against society. There were protests throughout universities about the struggle within education, and feminism swept the nation. Some examples of the music that was most influential were Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd and American Idiot by Green Day.
I think there needs to be a certain amount of outlaw to rock and roll. You know, and at that time, we were at that age where we really were those outlaws. If we would have been the Old West, we would have been bank robbers, I'm sure.
This music was more in your face about certain economic issues and the problems happening in everyday lives. The music also gave society a sense of rationalism and more morality. In a way, it was the youth expressing themselves in their own ways. Rock and roll has continued to evolve and influence throughout time, and there is only more to come.
Rock and roll is an ever-changing genre and is influential to popular music today. Heard from records to 8-tracks to CD players to Walkman, and to now iPhones, and who knows what next in the future. The music will always be affecting the youth and society. Although rap and hip-hop is the dominating genres in our new generation, rock and roll is still a popular genre. The new sound of rock and roll has its own edge and is still influencing our youth on what to wear and how to act. New famous rock and roll musicians are Mumford & Sons, Young the Giant, and Muse. Even some classic rock is coming back by the recently known artist Juliet Sims. Their raspy voice brings back the times as Stevie Nicks. These musicians have an excessive amount of effects on society and will keep doing so as long as rock and roll evolves throughout the future.
We gotta keep your eyes closed.
La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la.